Welcome to the May Academy program of the North American Unitarian Association. The NAUA is dedicated to supporting and promoting the practice of liberal religion by embracing freedom, reason, and tolerance, rooted in our commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of every person and all people. The NAUA Academy offers monthly programs on issues of concern in contemporary society from our liberal religious perspective. My name is Joyce Francis. I'm a member of the NAUA Academy Advisory Board, and I'm joining you from Port Townsend, Washington. Matthew, I'm going to remove my spotlight and turn it over to you.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Few opening remarks. I do want to thank NAUA and the Academy Committee for inviting me to share my thoughts with you all tonight. As the title says, our focus will be on liberalism in religion. Some of you joining us tonight have seen me in my role as a lay preacher present at some of UMIAC's Vesper services, and others may have met me in various social meetups, both sponsored by NAUA and other groups. I call this talk a vision for liberal religion because, well, as you will shortly see, what I learned studying perception-based functional model of optometry seems to apply equally well to a functional model for liberal religion, and no surprise, a functional model for liberal democracy. And as we will see, liberal religion and liberal democracy are very much intertwined and have evolved together in a symbiotic fashion. I want to also say I have made a lot of slides in my slide deck. Don't worry, there's a lot of text. Don't worry about it. Not going to read every word. There's highlighted things I will mention. And as I explained to our hosts, I crafted it this way because I really owe them. I've meant for a long time to submit an article to the Liberal Beacon. And so all that text will end up in a longer version, which will appear in the Liberal Beacon, possibly elsewhere. So with that, I'm going to start my share. And here we go. So as I said, I think we can move on from there.
Nothing has been shared, Matthew.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hit the actual share button. First tech glitch. Sorry about that, folks. There we go. Okay, so now there I am. And again, this is a quick rundown. Again, got my license to be an optometrist in 1980, started doing counseling stuff, did postdoctoral work 2002, and got involved in politics in 2004, started doing summer services 20 years ago, served the church, and got involved with UMIAC, okay? And the question is, this is what's on everyone's mind. What happened to my religion, right? And part of what I read going on there, Jessica Gross writes about these things for the New York Times. She wrote it's this happening across the board with many religions. Churches are closing, church going declining, nuns increasing, right? But let's take a look at what happened to our religion. I made this little graph based upon the UUA's own demographics. Now you can see here, the high point was in the civil rights era. So this is the blue line is membership. This is RE enrollments, and this is the combined. But you see this falling here. Then it comes back a bit, and then it's falling again. Now let's zoom in a little closer. Just over the last 15 years. And you can see we had a high point, if you don't count the civil rights era, around 2008, and it was slow decline, and then boom, 15% drop in the last 4 or 5 years. Okay, and the picture is even worse with RE enrollment. And what's going on? This is a graphic Steve Miles put up on one of the listservs, and he notes that, well, there was the controversy in 2017 with Peter Morales resigning. 2019, the Gadfly Papers comes out, and then the Eighth Principle stuff, COVID, but it's downhill, right? So, and again, something is going on here. What's going on? Anyone who's heard Todd preach, we know he says he's talking about illiberalism, and I'm going to look into this. Well, how do we know this? But I feel it's important that in doing this, we ask some questions. So it turns out, as often happens when you have to give a talk or a sermon, you're forced to put out the title first. Then you you know what you're going to talk about, but then you backfill to match the title. So it turns out this was prescient, because I think if we're going to talk about liberal religion, we have to start at and the model is based on vision. So let's talk about what is vision, what is liberalism, and then what is liberal religion, and what does this tell us about moving forward? So to go back to where the story begins with perception, what is vision? This is Dr. Paul Harris. This is the man that I learned from in the postdoctoral studies I did at the Baltimore Academy for Behavioral Optometry, although he's since moved on. He's now president of the Southern College of Optometry, after having brought what he did into the nationwide curriculum of the optometric extension program. Vision is more than simply seeing clearly. It is the entire process whereby an individual understands what he or she sees and uses this information to direct his or her actions. Deriving of meaning leads to directing of action. Okay, so the question is, you look at your eyes, what meaning you're deriving? And I have a couple of examples I'm going to run through pretty quickly here. I think that slide speaks for itself. Here's another one. You know I'm showing you a flat image. Do you see it in 3D? I think maybe you do. I think maybe you do. And this goes on. So there's a phenomenon called the Ames room, and I'm going to show a short video that'll hopefully this will run properly. We tested this in tech, and I'm going to go to full screen. Watch this. And at the end, you'll see how this happens. They move the camera back, and that's how it happens. The point being, perception can be tricked. And so now here's another thing that where perception gets tricky. Watch this video.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted. It is available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs from VisCog Productions.
I'll mention one other quick thing about perception. There's a field called behavioral economics, which comes out of perception. It was created by two Israeli psych professors, one of whom was awarded a MacArthur Genius Grant. The other one won the Nobel Prize, surprisingly, in economics, even though he's a psychology professor. But it has to do with the weird way that how our brains work can cause tricks. And one of the people who followed in their footsteps is a behavioral economist named Dan Ariely. And he's got great stuff. And I'll just mention this because, again, we try to be very careful here not to abuse copyright privileges. So I'll just mention it quickly. I just want you to imagine this. As Dan Ariely lectures, and there's a TED Talk on this, he says, you do a taste test. And he says you put 2 samples of beer labeled A and B, and you say you taste them, you put them out there. Which one do you prefer? And he says, well, it turns out that beer tastes better if you put a little bit of vinegar in it, except if you tell the person you're doing it. If you put the vinegar in and don't tell them, they prefer the beer with the vinegar. If you tell them, they prefer the beer without the vinegar. So the pre-knowledge affects how they experience it. Is that not weird, people? Right? How do you fix these weird problems of perception? So again, this is the last lesson from Dr. Harris. Provide opportunities for the patient to learn to see things in a new way. And we call this vision therapy. And it takes 3 to 18 months, depending on how deeply embedded is the problem and how massive is the thing. You want to align perception better with what's really out there. And this takes time. Okay. So that's vision. Now, there's one last thing. This is the best part of it all. One thing we use when we do vision therapy, we do behavioral optometry, is we make use of the fact that we have 2 eyes and they literally do not see the same thing. That you have a right eye and a left eye, they look at the world slightly differently. And you can prove this for yourself if you're looking at the screen in front of you and you hold your finger right in front of your nose. You're either going to see 2 fingers and the screen one, or if you cross your eyes, look at the finger, you'll see 1 finger and 2 screens. But this is not how we experience life. That there's some weird thing that goes on where your brain does not like disparate images, and the magic of 3D, the miracle of 3D stereopsis, it, instead of saying there's 2 images which I can't stand, it pops them into depth. And this gives us an enhanced perception of the world in its depth. It used to be thought there was a critical period for doing this, but it turns out that's not true. And I'll get to a reference for that later. But it requires this unembedding, learning to see things a new way, and it's very emotional. Okay, so now, this is the reference. Stereo Sue. Susan Barry is a neurobiologist, professor emerita of biological sciences and neuroscience at Mount Holyoke College. She had a crossed eyes childhood, did not develop 3D vision. And age 48, she saw a behavioral optometrist and developed 3D vision. And she said, my teaching told me there's a critical period, couldn't be done. So there was an orthodoxy that had to be updated. I see this as a UU parable. And again, great, there's references here, which I'll put into the article, although you can write me. I love talking, call me up, we'll do our own Zoom. I love doing it. Okay, so now what is liberalism? Much shorter exposition here. Again, there's some books I like. This is Liberalism and Its Discontents from Francis Fukuyama, who came up in the 80s as one of these neocon people, vaguely in the Reagan camp, but he said, you know what, this isn't exactly working. And he's written since like, oh, we got a problem here. And notice he says it's a doctrine that first emerged in the 17th century, right? It started coming, limitation of powers of governments, ultimately creating institutions protecting the rights of individual living in a jurisdiction. It's a big tent that encompasses a range of political views, okay? Here's another one from around the same period. And Joyce, I think you said you were reading this one. It's a little more lyrical. It reads like a New Yorker article. The Fukuyama is an easier read, I gotta say. But these are the bullet points I put in a previous talk. You're trying to realize liberty. And look, a compassionate connection to other people. And this one, social contacts precede the social contract. And by provoked consensus, what he means is that yes, you work to move things forward, but then liberalism says, and you go to the people who lost the fight, the vote, and you find a way to bring them into the new way that things are because of the vote. You don't say you lost, suck it. That's and it works better. And look at this: the search for radical change by humane measures. Okay, so that's quick thing. What is liberal religion? A good source is Unitarian minister and theologian James Luther Adams, taught many years at Harvard Divinity School. When he aged out, he just went 15 miles west to Newton, Mass, and taught at Newton Andover. And the thing was, I was living in Newton that time. I could have walked to that school. I could have learned from James Luther Adams myself, and it's killing me. But I did not grow up in a tradition that understood the call to ministry. I should have done it then. But anyway, here we are today. So anyway, 5 smooth stones. It's an image coming out of 1 Samuel in the Bible. David went down to the river to pick up 5 smooth stones to slay Goliath. Turns out he only needed 1, but that's another story. But this is it. Revelation is ongoing, continuous. There's not one source. It's not coercive. Hear that, people? Not coercive. You'd have to do it in community, but it does us no good if it's not expressed in society's institutions. And look, it's hopeful. Yay, happy times, good times, right? And then what is liberal religion? And those of us who still think about, the 7 principles and all this, right? We talk about a living tradition that brings them to us. And so why is this important? Well, let's look at history. This is George Santayana, Spanish historian. And he says, progress, far from consisting in change, depends on retentiveness. When change is absolute, there remains no being to improve and no direction is set for possible improvement. And when experience is not retained, infancy is perpetual. Those who, and this is the quote most people know, but you're getting it in context here. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And you know why this is important? Here's George Orwell. Who controls the past? Ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. We're seeing some of that now. So what I'm trying to do here is preserve a lot of this past and give us sources. And by the way, I would just say, no matter what our antagonists might do, who shall remain nameless, because we're on the positive side here, because of the Internet Archive, they can't literally erase this. So let's take a look at the past. I didn't put this slide on this, but while I'm on Orwell, he said, sooner or later, a false notion bumps up against a solid reality, usually on a battlefield. You don't want to get to that point. So let's not do that. Let's do this right thing here. So let's look at history. First principles, what the founders learned from the Greeks and Romans that shaped how that shaped our country. Thomas Ricks, I first learned about him many years ago. He was a defense correspondent for the Washington Post. He went on to write a Pulitzer Prize winning book about Churchill. He spent about 4 years at his home in Maine researching the founders. And what he did an amazing thing, which I think is entirely UU-ish. He read what they read when they were learning, what taught them, how did they grow up, so that they came to promulgate freeing ourselves from this empire, successfully waging a revolution, and then constructing our constitutional republic. Well, here's one guy that is mentioned. So it's the first 4 presidents. And I'm skipping over Washington, sorry. Does this not sound UU-ish to me, to you? Right? We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by their creator with unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Ricks shows this comes from the classical canon, as it were. Here's another guy, right? And by the way, I tried to pick images of how they looked at the time. There's other images of Jefferson that we're more used to, but that's close as I could get to when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. This is Madison around the time he was promoting and getting the Constitution enacted. Again, this is the preamble, but are these not UU values? More perfect union, justice, domestic tranquility, common defense, general welfare, and the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Okay. Again, a lot of words on the next slide. Sorry. But this is when he's talking about Adams, and it's from a section of the book called Adams and the Enlightenment. And look what it says here. See the bolded words? Child of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was more a process, and that word's going to come back for us. And look who gets mentioned here, Immanuel Kant. When asked in 1784 to define enlightenment, called it true reform in the ways of thinking. Oh, bad end quote, sorry. Again, I told our host that I get a little obsessive and it bothers me. I have the wrong quote there. So again, don't worry about the rest of the text. I will go on to say, but Kant, what's he got to do with this? What is enlightenment? And I love these words. Of course, by the way, Kant is a tough read, even in German. He makes it a little dense, but the first good English translation of his work, the first translation into English, which was used for many years, was not a good one, according to the sources I looked at. There are better ones now, and this comes from one of those. So enlightenment is man's emerges from his self-imposed immaturity. And he said laziness and cowardice are the reasons why people stay immature. I love this language. It is difficult for any individual man to work himself out of the immaturity. Remember, James Luther Adams said, that's why you can't do it alone. You need to be in community. That has all become his nature. And I'll get to the nature in a bit. He has even become fond of this state, and for the time being is actually incapable of using his own understanding. And then he said in Latin, sapere aude, dare to know, dare to know. Okay. Is this a fair question? I think so. Yes, but is it religion? And here again, going back to this historical sources, this is what Rick said. Christianity did not loom as large in colonial America as it would a century later or now in the United States. Understanding the Enlightenment is seeing to its thinkers there was a fundamental irrelevance of religious revelation. And this is where I part company with Rick's. There's a problem, even today, that some people don't see what we do as religion because we don't have a sacred text and we don't have a creed. And they'll say, oh, the Unitarians, those are the people who don't believe in anything, or they'll believe anything, and that's not religion. But I will make the case that it is a religion, and yea, in my opinion, A, the best, and B, the all-American religion. And there's another source that does the same thing. We had a study group here in Wayland that read this book. Great book. If you want a survey of 8 rival religions, by the way, it's 8 rival religions, and then he adds a bit on atheism, which he does. It's technically not a religion, but it's there, right? So, and this is the mention. By the way, this is as close I could get Jefferson to when he wrote this. So this is what Prothero refers to. He said, I rejoice that in this blessed country of free inquiry and belief, which has surrendered its creed and conscience to neither kings nor priests, the genuine doctrine of one and only God is reviving. And I trust there's not a young man now living in the US today who will not die a Unitarian. And he says, he was wrong. So he was wrong. Okay. And so Benjamin Waterhouse, by the way, was a physician. He was one of the co-founders of Harvard Medical School. And he's also the one who introduced the smallpox vaccine to this country, and he had been a roommate of John Adams when they were coming up. Adams didn't listen to him, but when Jefferson became president, he said, yeah, go ahead, vaccinate the country. So that's a little bit of a history there. And then there's a lot of text here. Again, we're not going to look at every word, but this is absolutely fantastic. So he's writing, my wife is giving me time cues, but I'm on schedule here, folks. Don't worry. I'm more than halfway through my slides. This is the denser part because this is the most important part. So he writes Waterhouse, and he's comparing. And again, this sounds like where we're at, right? The doctrines, and remember, this is the guy who Ricks said from a period where we're not religious. The doctrines of Jesus are simple and tend to all the happiness of man. There is one God, okay? And then I note that, and by the way, William Ellery Channing was the guy who accepted the term Unitarianism, which was meant to be an insult, but he said, fine, 1819. He does a sermon, which some of us call the Baltimore sermon, but it's actually called On Unitarian Christianity. You're going to call us Unitarians. Here's what it means, okay? There is a future state of rewards and punishments, by which he meant what's called salvation through character, and that to love God with all thy heart and the neighbor as thyself is the sum of religion. Compare these with the demoralizing dogmas of Calvin. There are three gods, that good works and love of neighbor are nothing. Faith is everything. The more incomprehensible the proposition, the more the merit in its faith. Oh, is that snarky or what? The reason in religion is of unlawful use. Oh, I think some of that is still around today. I'm not mentioning names. That God from the that he talked about election. Doesn't matter what you do. Some are saved, some are damned. Sorry losers who have the wrong faith. And then he says, which of these is the true and charitable Christian? So he's calling himself a Christian. He who believes in the simple doctrine of Jesus, or the impious dogmatist of, by the way, Athanasius are the Trinitarians, or Calvin. They're the usurpers of the Christian name, teaching a counter-religion made up of deliria and crazy imaginations. How's that for snark? I love this. I love this. Now, now remember, I mentioned Channing was the guy who accepted the term Unitarian. And that sermon, he went down to Baltimore for the ordination of Jared Sparks. And now here's Jefferson writing to Sparks. He says, I see nothing in which I'm likely to differ from you. I hold the precepts of Jesus, pure, benevolent, sublime as ever been, right? Metaphysical insanities of the aforementioned Trinitarians, Calvin, and I love this, are, to my understanding, mere lapses into polytheism, differing from paganism only by being more unintelligible. Oh, dishing it? Are we? Oh, sorry. Is that not great? I mean, I love this stuff. And by the way, what's great about Unitarian Universalism is it encourages us to go deep like this. You can read all this stuff. It turns out I learned this from the Tom Ricks book. All the correspondence that they could find of all the founders is digitized and available at the Library of Congress. You go to founders.loc.gov, and you can look up any of this and see the entirety of these things. These are just snippets. Absolutely fantastic. So, did I read? Maybe that's a duplicate. Yeah.
No, you jumped.
I jumped.
No, you're way down here.
I'm down here. Sorry, dear. Yeah. Okay. So,
Use this key from now on and you won't jump.
yes, sorry. Okay. So we have not, so that was 1820, 1822, right? Well, here's a book that picks up the story, kind of literally. This was originally an article, or he had an article in UU World, and then the book comes out. I bought it the day it came out, and it just opened a lot of doors for me. So, and this is kind of where this guy comes into the picture, and there it is. Now, notice the date here, 1846. And people use this phrase, oh, Emerson, he called it corpse cold Unitarianism. And here's what he said, sort of in context. I was at Cambridge yesterday to see Everett. Everett was the new president of Harvard, Edward Everett. The close of Everett's inaugural discourse was chilling and melancholy, with coolness indicating absolute skepticism and despair. He deliberately gave himself over to the corpse cold Unitarianism and immortality of Brattle Street and Boston. Okay, yeah. So here again, maybe the slide's out of order. I apologize. Here's the Kant comes up again here. Yes, this slide is out of order. Sorry. Oh, no, well, anyway, Enlightenment thinker, Foundations of the Metaphysics of Morals, 1785. So what happened is these second generation of Unitarian ministers We're seeing these things from Kant, what he had written, this one, make moral choices, abstract rules of reason. Morality is rooted in abstract rules of reason rather than word of God. Making choices what makes us human, prioritize the act of choice itself over any particular ends. Critique of pure reason. Objects must conform to our knowledge. Okay. And again, this is still a little dense because again, it's Kant and he's not an easy read. But that's the money quote there. So who reads Kant? This is Frederick Henry Hedge, Unitarian minister, classmate of Emerson's at Harvard Divinity School, class of 1829. Hedge qualified for his Harvard entrance exam at age 12. His father, who was a professor there, said, "You're too young. Go study in Germany for 5 years before you go to Harvard." So he knew his German, and he had studied in the what they called the gymnasium, and so he knew this. And he starts right. And so 1833 in the Christian Examiner, he writes an essay called Coleridge's Literary Characters, saying Coleridge studied with Kant. And he knew it great, but he hasn't written this yet because he didn't even finish his poetry. So I'll do it for him. And he likens it to the way Copernicus made the motions of the stars make sense, because it's not based around Earth, it's based around the sun. Suddenly everything makes sense. And that's heliocentric there. So that's the only way to understand this stuff. And so Hedge says that's what you need to do. The point is that interior consciousness, distinguished from a common consciousness, is an active and not a passive state. He says there are two poles, subject and object, and they interact. Okay. And he wrote for minds that seek with faith, hope, solution to the questions which relate spirit and form, substance and life, free will and fate, God and eternity. It will still be impossible to get a clear idea of their philosophy unless we raise ourselves at once to the transcendental point of view. It is free tuition, vigorous effort and will, and obeys the laws of cognition, which we've heard some about already, right? And this book, The Mind on Fire, is considered one of the more authoritative texts on Emerson. And he gets to chapter 27, but Emerson, as I said, graduated Harvard Divinity School 1829, was ordained, served a church for 3 years, then said, "I'm done. I'm not doing ministry." And according to Richardson, his interests in Unitarianism were waning. He was looking at Quakerism, and then he comes across this article that Hedge put in the Christian Examiner, and he said, Hedge boldly maps out the Copernican revolution, and then, if there was a single moment after which American transcendentalism can be said to exist, it is when Emerson read Hedge's manifesto. He called it a living, leaping logos, logos being like the word of God. And again, he wrote his brother to say, reason is the highest faculty of the soul, what we mean often by the soul itself. It is vision. Understanding toils all the time. And I'm supposed to be using my down pointer, as my wife reminded me. Sorry. So people often attribute the corpse cold Unitarianism thing to the Divinity School address. So Emerson, leaving the ministry, taking up transcendentalism, writes his book, Nature, 1835, Rockstar. So he gets invited to Harvard. Hey, why don't you come speak to the graduating class of 1838? They want to hear what you have to say. And there was 7 graduates, their professors, and a lot of people in the small chapel at Harvard Divinity School, which is still there. And he proceeds to tell them, you guys are doing a terrible job. And decaying church and wasting of belief. And what greater calamity can fall a nation than loss of worship? The dogmas of our church are wholly insulated from anything now extant in the life and business of the people. And then he says, and you're not teaching a vibrant ministry that the people will want to hear. It throttles the preacher wherever the pulpit is usurped by a formalist Then is the worshiper defrauded and disconsolate. I love this. I once heard a preacher who sorely tempted me to say I would go to church no more. Men go, thought I, where they are wont to go. The capital secret of this his profession, namely to convert life into truth, had not been learned. And so he says, what in these days can be done by us? Right? Well, it's already been declared, right? I look for the new teacher that shall follow so far in these shining laws that he shall see them come full circle, et cetera, et cetera. So what is liberal religion? Laws of cognition, stories, wrong spotting. And what do I mean by this? Well, I can do this here. Well, one thing is you have to be able to change your mind. And this is Frederick Douglass. Some churches, they like reading what to the slave is the 4th of July, a speech he gave. But he then just 8 years later, he says, oh, I've been modifying my feeling and my position is now one of reform, not revolution. Here's another guy that I think is you-ish. We all know this phrase from the Gettysburg Address. He got it from this guy. And Douglas thought so much of Parker that he said Parker had tuberculosis. He died in Florence, Italy. He had a very plain marker, and he says this is not worthy of this man. He started essentially a GoFundMe campaign to put up this headstone on which it says, "The great American preacher, his name is engraved in marble, his virtues in the hearts of those he helped free from slavery and superstition." The story goes on, though, because trouble still amounts. Another book I read, notice it says prequel, An American Fight Against Fascism. It's showing how the Nazis tried to propagandize this country and almost succeeded from the day they got into power in 1933 right into the war. And she documents that. Yet here's the guy that did the messaging to fight it. And I think those are our values. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. And he said, we have to defend this. We have to be a new order, arsenal of democracy, he called it. And the message I got out of that book was, though, he couldn't go full throttle on it until he had won the election of 1940, and which was not at all a given. So moving forward into the 60s, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends to justice. But that's where he got it from. Again, Unitarian minister, Theodore Parker. Now, again, some right to say that he was so off the mainstream, he had been disowned by his own religion. I have a different view about that, but not for this talk. So what happened to my religion? Let's apply what we've learned. Well, one thing that started me on this pathway after I learned behavioral optometry stuff, I found this pamphlet appeared in the narthex of the church here in Wayland. And this, we often struggle. What is Unitarian Universalism? What kind of the elevator speech? And this was my first elevator speech. We seek to act as a moral force in the world, believing ethical living is the supreme witness of religion, the here and now, and the effects our actions will have on us, on future generations concerned of, and we know that our relationships with one another, with diverse peoples, should be governed by justice, equity, and compassion. Now, there's a problem here, because can we sell it? Here's this gentleman who, I vet my quotes, and I invite all of us to do this. A liberal is a person who can't take his own side in a quarrel. By the way, he said, then I guess I'm not a very good liberal because I am taking a side for this. And I say liberals must stand up for liberalism in our society and our religion, but there's a problem. This is the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. Nothing is so difficult as not deceiving oneself. We don't see, we see as. To me, that sounds like the laws of cognition. And in this regard, we turn into how do you communicate and connect with other people? And these are terms. The problem is you get involved in religion, you go deep enough, you're talking philosophy, and they have all these words that you have to learn. But there's three good ones here. There's three ways to connect with other people. Didactic is one way. This is what, the professor's at the front of the room. You're there, the speaker like me is talking to you. I'm just telling you, you should listen to me. There's one called heuristic. I have a point, you have a point. It's like the debate society. And what I love is it comes from the Greek goddess of discord. But then there's dialectic. We have different points of view, and the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. This, to me, is the analog of 3D stereopsis. Disparity resolves into greater depth of understanding. So that's why I like this. This is a vision for liberal religion. So, and then you get into this thing, liberation theology versus process theology. And this is, of course, a short form. Those who were with me on the search committee got to hear a longer version of this. But this is my quick down and dirty. Liberation theology ignores the law of cognition, goes for rapid revolutionary change, and it's heuristic, and I call it a new orthodoxy. Process theology says it's a process, just like vision therapy takes months, and real change like this is evolutionary, not revolutionary, but it involves dialectic, and I call that true liberal religion. And this is a great summary. Fran Lebowitz wrote one great book and then had the world's longest case of writer's block, as she says, but I love this quote: think before you speak, read before you think. And so you can see I've done a lot of reading, but it's a labor of love. One book, we're heading into the home stretch here, people. I think I'm bringing this in on budget, thank God. What should shape our perception of Unitarian Universalism? Now, here I have to say, like Frederick Douglass, I've had to change my view on something. I always used to interpret the first principle of inherent worth and dignity as saying we are inherently good, and that it's just we get some dings and whatever that make us now act in ways. This guy, he studied human evolution, and again, it's a whole talk in itself, but he says, no, evolution has handed to us the capacity for incredible kindness and generosity and cooperativity, but also some nasty stuff. And okay, so the challenge to me is, well, how do you go for the good stuff and bring down the bad stuff? And so here's an example, and this is my metaphor for the good stuff. Lincoln's first inaugural address, right? He's elected already. The Union is hanging by a thread. He's trying to hold it together. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies, though passion may have strained. It must not break our bonds of affection. And then he gets down to flowery language. We will again be touched by the better angels of our nature. That's a problem, though, because you're dealing with systems. Not everyone believes in what we call dignity culture. There's a culture that is rife. It was in the Confederate South. You find it the farther south and west you go, and the more rural you go, that honor is first. Reputation comes first before they're going to just assume that, oh, he means well, right? So stories help us make sense of the world and can even help us heal from trauma. They also shape our cultural narratives for better or worse. And how honor culture dictates the way we think and behave. And I would say our dignity culture does, but those of us who are steeped in this tradition, I think, have to make the first move. I think it gives us more flexibility to do that. So, quick point here, Sherry Turkle talks about reclaiming connection. Those who have read, the Gadfly Papers are in its source from the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, in particular, with the growth of social media, this stuff has just taken off. Connected but alone. We're going through our devices. It's a problematic. And then I love this quote I threw on this slide: connect. That was the whole of her sermon. Only connect the prose and the passion, and both will be exalted, and human love will be seen at its height. Connecting is the way to bridge the gap from honor culture to dignity culture. Stories, quick thing. Because this lecture came about because in preparing these talks, my life came full circle. When I started doing the counseling stuff, this was the kind of stuff we're looking at. The stories we tell ourselves that hold us back. And they're going to hold us back. And she says, it may work for you for a while, but when it stops working, that's when they come to see me. But we can do this in our churches, okay? But here's a bigger problem. Stories are weapons. Psychological warfare in the American mind. When we are beholden to these stories we tell ourselves, it's not just going to affect us and hold us back, make our life a little harder. This can be used against us. And again, a lot of things. So she says, you got to slow down, right? So slower process allows the mind to think better. Keep receipts. That means, where did you get it? I think you use cite sources. And because she said you'll forget, but you can go back and look at it. Tell better stories. This is a propaganda war. Propaganda appeals to us because we're lonely, because we want to feel connected. Oh, how about following the advice to only connect? And so here's this. I had our search committee read this before we started our search. It was a cautionary tale. But in talking about it, she said, human beings are fallible. We're not really good at knowing what we want. That's why advertising is effective. And this book, again, there's a whole chapter on that. The guy who invented modern advertising was Sigmund Freud's nephew. And instead of using the knowledge to not propagandize people, he used it to sell cigarettes to newly liberated women. And again, Chomsky wrote a book, Modern Understanding of Cognition and Modern Means of Communication Goes to Propaganda. Reinhold Niebuhr, 20th century theologian, contending factions in a social struggle require morale, and morale is created by the right dogmas, symbols, and emotionally potent oversimplifications. Now, I think in our churches, we can go to the real stuff, the cognition stuff, but you gotta win the war if you're going to preserve this. So what are we supposed to do? How do we shape our perception of Unitarian Universalism? 7, 6, 5, 4. We have 7 principles that defines a process. See, it's not a creed. It's not a particular statement. It says this is how you do it. 6 sources. There's richness everywhere, but can you see it? Well, when you open up your mind, you start to see more and more of this. I already mentioned the 5 smooth stones that define liberalism. And then my summation, the dreaded elevator speech. This is a 4-letter elevator speech, OFAB. It's a nice little acronym, and it stands for open heart. That's the stuff we say, may I have loving kindness, may you have loving kindness, may we have loving kindness. F is free mind. William Ellery Channing, free mind. We are in the midst of influence which menace the intellect and heart, and to be free is to conquer these. And there's a reading in the Gray UU hymnal. And then Sophia Lyon-Fahs, another 20th century Unitarian. Some beliefs are like blinders, other like gateways. Some weaken you, some strengthen you, some are rigid, some are pliable. And my closing statement comes from Universalist minister Olympia Brown, who was the first woman ordained by her own religion, 1863. She knocked around a bit. And then eventually she went out to save this small church in Racine, Wisconsin from going down the drain. And she made a success, so much so that she left it after 9 years to work full-time on women's suffrage. She's one of the few originals who was still around to vote, finally in 1920. She goes back to the church in Racine and says, stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it. There is nothing in all the world so important to you as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before you the loftiest ideals, which has comforted you in sorrow, strengthened you for noble duty, and made the world beautiful for you. Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that you are worthy to be entrusted with this great message, and that you are strong enough to work for a great, true principle without counting the cost. Go on finding ever new applications of these truths and new enjoyments in their contemplation. And I say, look at the things I've talked about tonight, and I went pretty quickly, but again, hopefully we'll have this in print form soon, or just give me a buzz. And I'm always happy to talk about this. I've been showing up at various meetups, both from NAUA and through other means. I welcome talking to people. I love doing this stuff. It's a labor of love. And with that, I yield back, and I made it in 50 minutes. Oh, and I got to stop sharing. My wife pointed. See, I need, forget God. Joan is my co-pilot. So thank you, Joan. So that's it.
I want to know what you, for OFAB, you told